I stared at the text message on my phone, reading it for the third time, my hands trembling slightly as the words sank in. We've changed all the locks and the gate code. We don't trust you anymore. Brittany saw you driving by the house last night and felt threatened. The irony would have been laughable if it weren't so devastating. After 2 years of paying $5,600 every month to keep my parents' house from foreclosure, after sacrificing my own dreams of homeownership, after watching my younger sister Brittany get handed everything on a silver platter while I worked myself to exhaustion, they were telling me I wasn't welcome anymore. I sat in my Chicago office, the city skyline stretching before me through the floor-to-ceiling windows, and felt something crack inside my chest. At 32, I was the director of marketing for a successful tech company, respected by my colleagues, financially stable despite the enormous monthly payments I'd been making. Yet here I was, feeling like that overlooked child again, the one whose straight A's were met with a casual, good job, while Brittany's B+ report cards warranted celebration dinners and new clothes. My phone buzzed with another message from my mother. "Miranda, please call us. We need to discuss this situation rationally." Rationally. As if there was anything rational about giving the house to the daughter who had contributed nothing while shutting out the one who had kept them from losing everything. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, memories flooding back like a tide I couldn't stop. Growing up in Oakwood Hills, I had learned early that love in the foster household came with conditions and hierarchies. Brittany, 3 years younger, had been the golden child from the moment she could walk. Her birthday parties were elaborate affairs with dozens of guests, professional decorations, and gifts that cost more than my parents spent on me in 6 months. My birthdays were quiet family dinners with store-bought cake and practical gifts like clothes for school or supplies for my art projects. When report cards came home, the ritual was always the same. My perfect grades would earn a brief acknowledgement before the conversation shifted to Brittany's mediocre performance, which somehow required extensive discussion, tutoring that I often provided for free, and rewards for any minor improvement. "Brittany needs more encouragement," my mother would explain when I dared to ask why my achievements went unnoticed. "You have natural talent. She has to work harder for everything." I had accepted this narrative, throwing myself into my studies and planning for a future where my worth wouldn't be measured against my sister's needs. While Brittany coasted through high school and college, dropping out of programs when they became too challenging, getting bailed out of financial scrapes, and generally living the consequence-free life of someone who knew she'd always be rescued, I built a career. I worked summers and weekends, earned scholarships, graduated magna cum laude, and climbed the corporate ladder with a determination born from knowing I could only rely on myself. The house had been left to all of us by my grandparents, a beautiful colonial in one of the better neighborhoods, worth nearly $500,000. It was supposed to ensure that both Brittany and I would have security, a place in the family legacy. But my parents' financial management had been disastrous, made worse by their constant bailouts of Brittany and her unemployed husband Jeremy. 2 years ago, when the foreclosure notice arrived, I had stepped in without hesitation. My parents were panicking, Brittany was pregnant and dramatic, and Jeremy was, as usual, nowhere to be found when responsibility called. I offered to take over the mortgage payments temporarily, just until they could get back on their feet. The monthly payment of $5,600 was more than my own rent, but I convinced myself it was an investment in the family home, a way to preserve what my grandparents had built. What followed were the hardest 2 years of my life. I cancelled my own house hunting plans, moved into a smaller apartment, cut every expense I could think of, and picked up freelance marketing work on weekends. While my friends were buying homes and taking vacations, I was working 70-hour weeks to cover not just my own expenses but a mortgage on a house I wasn't even allowed to claim as my residence for tax purposes. The family dinners continued every Sunday, a tradition I maintained despite the growing resentment I felt watching Brittany play the princess while I paid for the castle. She would complain about how hard it was to find work that fit her schedule, how Jeremy was stressed about money, how the baby made everything so expensive. Meanwhile, my parents would nod sympathetically and suggest maybe I could help with this expense or that emergency, always with the understanding that I was the responsible one, the one who had her life together. My best friend Samantha had started avoiding these family dinners when I invited her, claiming they made her too angry to watch. "They're using you, Miranda," she would say. "You're not their daughter, you're their ATM." My boyfriend Daniel, who I'd been dating for over a year, was more diplomatic but equally concerned. "I just want to make sure you're taking care of yourself too," he would say after particularly difficult Sundays when I'd come home drained and frustrated. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself it was what family did for each other. I told myself that eventually, they would recognize what I was sacrificing and make it right. The beginning of the end came on a Sunday in November. I arrived at the house as usual, bringing groceries I'd picked up on the way because I'd noticed they were running low on basics. Brittany and Jeremy were already there, looking unusually excited about something. Throughout dinner, they kept exchanging glances and whispering, and my mother kept shooting my father meaningful looks. Finally, as we were clearing the dishes, Brittany made her announcement. "Jeremy and I have some news. We're going to be moving in here permanently. Mom and Dad think it's the best solution for everyone." I set down the plate I was holding very carefully. "Moving in? What about the mortgage payments?" The silence that followed was deafening. My father cleared his throat. "Well, that's something we need to discuss. We've been thinking that since Brittany and Jeremy are going to be living here, taking care of the property, it makes sense for the house to eventually go to them. You don't really need it, Miranda. You have your career, your apartment in the city. I don't need it." The words came out strangled. "I've been paying over $5,000 a month for 2 years. I've paid more than $130,000 to keep this house in the family." Brittany laughed, actually laughed. "Come on, Miranda. You act like that was some huge sacrifice. You make good money. It's not like you were struggling." The room spun around me. 2 years of 60-hour work weeks, of cancelled plans, of watching every penny, of choosing work over relationships and career advancement over personal happiness, and she thought it wasn't a struggle. I looked around the room at my parents, hoping to see some acknowledgement, some recognition of what I'd given up. Instead, my mother was looking at me with that familiar expression of mild disappointment. "We hoped you'd be happy for your sister. She's finally found stability with Jeremy, and they need our support right now." "What about my support?" I asked. "What about what I've needed for the past 2 years?" "You've always been independent," my father said. "Brittany needs more help. She's not as naturally capable as you are." I stood up from the table, my legs shaking. "I need some air." Brittany called after me as I walked toward the door. "Don't be dramatic, Miranda. You're always making everything about you. Can't you just be happy for me for once?" I drove to Daniel's apartment and cried on his shoulder for 2 hours. He held me while I sobbed out my frustration, my sense of betrayal, my exhaustion from years of being the responsible one who never got anything in return. "You have to stop enabling them," he said gently. "They're never going to change as long as you keep rescuing them." For the next week, I avoided my parents' calls. I needed time to process what had happened, to figure out how I felt and what I wanted to do. Samantha took me out for drinks and didn't say, "I told you so," though I could see it in her eyes. "What are you going to do?" she asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "The house will go into foreclosure if I stop paying. But apparently, I'm not getting the house anyway. So let it go into foreclosure," she said. "It's not your responsibility to save people who don't appreciate you." That's when the text message arrived. The final, brutal message that made my decision for me. I called Samantha immediately. "They changed the locks," I said without preamble. "What?" "They changed the locks on the house. The house I've been paying for. And they're saying they don't trust me anymore and that Brittany felt threatened because I drove by last night." I laughed bitterly. I wasn't even in that neighborhood last night. I was working late and went straight home. "Miranda." Samantha's voice was deadly calm. "You need to stop paying that mortgage right now. But the house will be lost anyway. You just heard them say they're giving it to Brittany. You're paying for a house you'll never get, for people who just locked you out of it. My hands were shaking as I hung up the phone. I sat in my kitchen, staring at my laptop, knowing that with a few clicks I could end the automatic payment that had been draining my account for 2 years. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing that once I jumped, there would be no going back. But what was I going back to? A family that saw me as a source of money rather than a daughter. A relationship where my value was measured only by what I could provide. I opened my banking app and navigated to the automatic payment section. My finger hovered over the cancel button for the mortgage payment. 2 years, $134,400, and it had bought me nothing but contempt and the privilege of being excluded from the house I'd saved. I pressed cancel. Then I drafted an email to the bank, copying myself, formally notifying them that I was no longer responsible for the mortgage payments on the property and that any future payments would need to come from the homeowners directly. I included screenshots of the text messages about the changed locks and the conversation at dinner where my parents had stated their intention to give the house to Brittany. After I sent the email, I sat in the silence of my apartment and felt something I hadn't experienced in years: relief. For the first time in 2 years, I had chosen myself over my family's demands. It was terrifying and liberating in equal measure. The silence lasted exactly 48 hours. On Tuesday morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Texts, voicemails, missed calls, emails. Brittany was furious, accusing me of being vindictive and jealous. My father left a voicemail calling my behavior completely unacceptable and demanding I fix this situation immediately. My mother sent a long text claiming the lock change had been Jeremy's idea for security reasons, and that I was welcome anytime, but I needed to resolve this issue with the bank right away. Extended family members started calling. Apparently, the news of my abandonment of the family had spread through our relatives like wildfire, with my parents' version of events painting me as the selfish daughter who had turned her back on the family in their time of need. Most of the calls were variations of, "I'm sure there's been a misunderstanding," or "family is more important than money," but a few relatives surprised me with their support. My Aunt Catherine, my father's younger sister, called and asked if she could take me to lunch. We met at a quiet restaurant downtown, and she listened while I told her the whole story, including details I'd never shared with anyone about the years of being overlooked and undervalued. "I've watched this dynamic for years," she admitted. "Your parents have always treated Brittany like she was made of glass and you like you were made of steel. They assumed you could handle anything, so they never worried about you. But that doesn't make it right." She also confirmed what I'd suspected: Brittany had been actively poisoning my parents against me for months, suggesting that I was resentful about the house, that I was planning to claim ownership, that I was trying to control the family with money. Jeremy had lost another job and they were desperate for a rent-free place to live. In their minds, the house had become their salvation, and I was the obstacle standing in their way. The bank sent the first official notice 3 days after I canceled the payment. My mother forwarded it to me with a message: "Please fix this, Miranda." I made an appointment with a therapist, Dr. Emily Watson, who specialized in family dynamics and boundary setting. In our first session, I laid out the entire situation, expecting her to tell me I'd been too harsh, that I should have found a way to work things out. Instead, she looked at me with compassion and said, "It sounds like you've been in survival mode for a very long time. What you did took incredible courage." Over the following weeks, as the mortgage situation escalated, my family's true colors became impossible to ignore. They tried every manipulation tactic they could think of. My mother claimed she was having chest pains from the stress. My father alternated between rage and self-pity, sometimes within the same phone call. Brittany started a campaign to turn other family members against me, sharing selective details about our financial arrangement while omitting the part where they'd locked me out of the house I was paying for. When emotional manipulation failed, they tried more direct approaches. Someone attempted to access my bank accounts online using old passwords. Brittany called my workplace, trying to reach my boss to discuss my family situation. Fortunately, my supervisor was both professional and supportive, asking only if I needed any time off to deal with personal matters. The bank sent increasingly urgent notices. My parents panicked. Brittany and Jeremy tried desperately to qualify for a mortgage, but with their employment history and credit scores, no lender would touch them. They couldn't afford the monthly payments anyway. Their combined income was less than what I'd been paying just for the mortgage, not including taxes and insurance. My family's attempts at reconciliation became more frantic. My mother called crying, claiming it had all been a misunderstanding, begging me to come back to Sunday dinner. My father left voicemails insisting that the money I'd paid had been a gift to the family, and that I was being unreasonable to expect any ownership rights. Jeremy even called me directly, suggesting that I continue paying for 6 more months while they figured things out. I consulted with a lawyer, Amanda Chin, who specialized in family law and financial disputes. She reviewed all my documentation and confirmed what I already knew. I had no legal obligation to continue the payments, and my evidence clearly showed that the arrangement had been presented as temporary assistance, not a gift. I also met with a financial advisor who helped me understand just how much my family's situation had been costing me. In addition to the $134,400 I'd already paid, I'd lost opportunities for career advancement because of the freelance work I'd taken on to cover the payments. I'd missed out on property appreciation in the Chicago market, where I could have bought a condo that would have gained significant value. Most importantly, I'd deferred my own life for 2 years, putting relationships and personal goals on hold to subsidize my family's financial irresponsibility. The advisor ran the numbers and showed me that if I stopped the payments immediately, I could qualify for a mortgage on my own place within 6 months. I could finally buy the home I'd been dreaming of for years. As the foreclosure process moved forward, my family's desperation reached new heights. The bank sent a final notice, giving them 30 days to bring the mortgage current or face the loss of the property. My parents hired a lawyer, Richard Thompson, who sent me a threatening email about financial elder abuse and breach of fiduciary duty. I forwarded it to Amanda, who laughed and said it was the legal equivalent of throwing spaghetti at a wall to see what would stick. My father called me, sobbing, begging me to reconsider. "After everything we've done for you," he said. "After all the love and support we've given you over the years." I found myself wondering what love and support he was referring to. The years of being overlooked? The constant comparisons to Brittany? The assumption that I would sacrifice my own dreams for the family good without question or appreciation? Daniel and I had been talking about moving in together, and as the family drama intensified, he suggested I spend more time at his place. "You don't need to be dealing with this level of toxicity every day," he said. "Let me take care of you for a while." It was a foreign concept, someone wanting to take care of me instead of the other way around. I'd been the caretaker for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be cared for. The end came with a phone call from Aunt Catherine. "There's going to be a family meeting Sunday afternoon at my house," she said. "Your parents have asked everyone to come. They want to discuss the situation." "I don't think that's a good idea," I said. "I think you should come," she said gently. "Bring Daniel if you want. Bring your documentation. It's time for everyone to hear the whole truth." I consulted with Amanda, who advised me to attend but to be prepared for emotional manipulation and guilt tactics. "Stick to the facts," she said. "Don't let them make this about anything other than their decision to lock you out of a house you were paying for." Sunday afternoon found me sitting in Aunt Catherine's living room, facing my parents, Brittany, Jeremy, and several other relatives. Uncle Robert was there, along with Aunt Martha and a few cousins I hadn't seen in years. The lawyer, Thompson, sat beside my father with a briefcase full of documents that I suspected were mostly for show. My father stood up and addressed the room as if he were giving a presentation. He talked about the family home, about the importance of keeping it in the family, about the financial hardship they were facing. He mentioned that I had been helping with expenses, but painted it as a minor contribution rather than the full mortgage payment. "Miranda has decided to withdraw her support at the worst possible time," he concluded. We're hoping the family can help her see reason. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding. I'd like to tell my side of the story. For the next 20 minutes, I laid out the facts. The exact amount I'd paid, the sacrifices I'd made, the promises that had been broken, and finally, the text message about the changed locks. I passed around printouts of my bank statements showing the monthly payments, the messages from my parents, and the email trail with the bank. The room was silent when I finished. Brittany exploded. "You're making it sound like we forced you to pay. You offered. And now you're trying to make us lose our home because you're jealous that Mom and Dad chose me." "I'm not trying to make you lose anything," I said calmly. "I'm simply no longer paying for a house that I've been locked out of and told I'll never have any claim to." "But you don't need it," she screamed. "You have money. You have a career. I have children to think about. And whose fault is that?" The words came out before I could stop them. "Whose fault is it that you've never held a job for more than 6 months? Whose fault is it that you've spent 30 years expecting everyone else to solve your problems?" My mother started crying. "Please don't fight. We're a family. We should be able to work this out." "Are we a family?" I asked. "Because families don't lock each other out. Families don't lie about feeling threatened to justify changing locks. Families don't take $134,000 from someone and then act like it was nothing." Thompson tried to interject with some legal-sounding language about moral obligations and family duty, but Uncle Robert cut him off. "Let me get this straight," he said, looking at my parents. "Miranda paid your mortgage for 2 years, and your response was to give the house to Brittany and change the locks so Miranda couldn't get in?" "It's more complicated than that," my mother said weakly. "No," said Aunt Catherine firmly. "It really isn't." The meeting devolved from there. My parents continued to insist that I was abandoning the family. Brittany continued to scream about how unfair I was being. Jeremy sat silently, occasionally nodding when Brittany looked at him for support. Finally, my father played his last card. "After everything we've done for you, Miranda. After all the love, the support, the sacrifices we made to raise you, this is how you repay us." I looked at him for a long moment, this man who had raised me but never really saw me, who had benefited from my sense of responsibility while never acknowledging the burden it placed on me. "What sacrifices?" I asked quietly. "What love? What support? You mean the love that was always conditional on what I could provide? The support that disappeared the moment it conflicted with what Brittany wanted? The sacrifices like giving my sister elaborate birthday parties while I got store-bought cake?" The room was dead silent. "You want to know what love looks like?" I continued. "Love doesn't keep score. Love doesn't ask one child to sacrifice her dreams so the other child can avoid consequences. Love doesn't change the locks on someone who's been keeping you from losing your home." My mother looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. "What do you want from us, Miranda? Do you want the house? Is that what this is about?" I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. "I don't want the house," I said. "I don't want anything from you anymore. I just want to be free. I'm done being the family ATM. I'm done being responsible for everyone else's choices. I'm done sacrificing my happiness for people who don't even appreciate it." Daniel and I left shortly after that. I felt hollow but also lighter than I had in years. For the first time in my adult life, I had put my own needs first, and the world hadn't ended. The house went into foreclosure 6 weeks later. My parents had to move into a small apartment across town. Brittany and Jeremy's marriage fell apart under the financial stress, and she ended up moving back in with our parents temporarily before finding her own place and a job as an administrative assistant. 3 months after the family meeting, my mother sent me an email. It was different from all the previous messages, devoid of manipulation or demands. She simply said that she'd been thinking about our conversation, that she was starting to understand how unfairly they'd treated me over the years, and that she was sorry for the pain they'd caused. She didn't ask for anything, didn't make excuses, just acknowledged that she'd failed me as a mother in some fundamental ways. I saved the email but didn't respond immediately. I was still working with Dr. Watson on processing years of accumulated hurt and learning to trust my own perceptions of reality. The family dynamics that had shaped my entire life didn't heal overnight. 6 months after I stopped paying the mortgage, I qualified for a loan and started house hunting in earnest. Daniel and I found a beautiful townhouse in Lincoln Park, with exposed brick walls, a modern kitchen, and a small garden where I could finally plant the herbs I'd always wanted to grow. We moved in together on a crisp October morning, exactly 1 year after the family meeting that had changed everything. My relationship with my parents slowly began to improve, though it looked nothing like it had before. I accepted my mother's invitation to lunch, and we had the most honest conversation we'd ever had. She told me she'd started seeing a therapist too, trying to understand the patterns she'd established in our family. She admitted that she'd always seen me as the strong one who didn't need as much attention, while she'd viewed Brittany as fragile and requiring protection. I realize now that I was protecting her from growing up, she said. And I was taking advantage of your strength instead of nurturing it. I appreciated her honesty, but I also maintained firm boundaries. I would meet her for lunch occasionally, but I wouldn't attend family gatherings that included Brittany, who remained bitter and unrepentant. I wouldn't provide financial assistance, no matter how small or seemingly innocent the request. I wouldn't be anyone's safety net ever again. A year after buying our house, Daniel proposed to me in our little garden, surrounded by the thriving herb plants and vegetable beds we'd planted together. He chose the anniversary of the day I'd stopped paying my parents' mortgage, which he called, "the day you chose yourself." We planned a small wedding, inviting my parents but not Brittany. Aunt Catherine served as my matron of honor, and Uncle Robert walked me down the aisle. My parents attended and were polite, though the relationship remained somewhat strained. My mother had continued her therapy and seemed to understand why certain boundaries were necessary, even if she didn't always like them. The week before the wedding, my mother asked me to lunch one more time. We sat in the same restaurant where she'd apologized months earlier, and she told me about her sessions with her therapist, about recognizing the generational patterns she'd inherited from her own mother, about her commitment to doing better with any future grandchildren. "I know I can't undo the past," she said. "But I want you to know that I see you now, really see you, in a way I never did before. And I'm proud of the woman you've become, not because of what you can do for others, but because of who you are." It was the kind of recognition I'd craved my entire childhood, and while it came decades too late to heal all the wounds, it was something. On my wedding day, as I stood in our garden surrounded by friends who truly knew and valued me, by Daniel who loved me without conditions, by family members who respected my boundaries, I felt something I'd never experienced before, the absolute certainty that I was exactly where I belonged. The little girl who had learned to measure her worth by her usefulness to others was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her value, who demanded respect, who refused to accept love that came with strings attached. I had lost the house I'd paid for, but I'd gained something infinitely more valuable, myself. Later that evening, as Daniel and I danced in our living room to music playing from his phone, I thought about the text message that had started it all. "We don't trust you anymore." They had been right, in a way. They couldn't trust me anymore, not to enable their dysfunction, not to sacrifice my happiness for their comfort, not to be the person who said yes to everything and asked for nothing in return. And I was grateful for that. The person I had been was trustworthy to a fault, reliable to the point of self-destruction. The person I had become was trustworthy to herself first, reliable in her commitment to her own well-being. It had taken 32 years, but I had finally learned the most important lesson of all: you cannot love others well until you learn to love yourself enough to demand the love you deserve.